goes to visit Kuwait. There's now this attempt on his life, or this alleged attempt, because it's funny, when the FBI investigated, a couple things occurred. At that time, there was a prohibition against using testimony derived from torture. And when the Kuwaiti government presented the 6 defendants, they recanted their confessions and said it was done under torture and there was obvious signs of distress. So the FBI threw the confessions out, did a forensic investigation of the explosive material, only to find that, yes, it was Iraqi in origin, but it came to Kuwait in 1991 when Saddam Hussein occupied, or 1990, and it stayed in Kuwait when Saddam Hussein left in 1991, meaning it was under the control of the Kuwaiti government when the assassination attempt was supposed to occur. The beauty of this, though, isn't that this was a false allegation. It's that Clinton acted on it by sending cruise missiles into the intelligence headquarters, thereby confirming this, not only in terms of, giving it the perception of reality, but politically as well. Now the president is tied to this policy. But he's not active on it. Yes, the CIA goes forward. They create this wonderful umbrella organization called the Iraqi National Congress, headed up by this great Iraqi politician named Ahmed Chalabi. But it doesn't do a very good job. It doesn't do a good job at all. The CIA is not fully funding it, not fully supporting it. In 1994, Bill Clinton's inability to deal with the continued rule of Saddam Hussein becomes a political liability. Political liability at home when Newt Gingrich and the Republicans sweep into the Congress using Clinton's inability to deal with Saddam Hussein as political ammunition on the domestic front. That's why in 1995, Bill Clinton tells the CIA, get rid of this man once and for all by the summer of 1996, so he's no longer a lead weight around my shoulders going into the 96 election. Bill Clinton was now fully committed to a policy of regime change, ACA, name change in Iraq, not because he was sympathetic to George Herbert Walker Bush, because he was trapped by domestic American politics.
I've just remembered what the bad reason was for not indicting Saddam Hussein, by the way, not bringing in a proper bill of indictment. It wasn't just a bad decision on its own, it was made for a bad reason. When most of the worst of his crimes were being committed, the invasion of Iran, the genocide in northern Iraq, and the abolition of Kuwait, at almost all those material times he was a semi-official ally of the British and American governments, and a trial would have enabled him to deploy the defense that they'd known at the time and they had no right to be surprised. So that's what we basically discovered when we pressed the British Attorney General for, on this point. I don't disagree very much with Mr. Ritter's condensed history of the evolution of Iraq policy. I think it stops short of a very important decision by the United States Senate to pass the Iraq Liberation Act, which was an open debate. Everyone knew what they were voting on and for. Every single senator voted for it. No senator voted against. It has been the policy of the United States since 1998 that the government of Saddam Hussein shall be removed. That was the right policy then. It's the right policy now, and it was democratically arrived at. I would further add that I feel no more bound in my own opinions on this by anything said by any of these presidents than I was when James Baker asked what his justification was this week for the first Gulf War, said after a very long and thoughtful and after a while agonizing pause, jobs. Now, I'm not bound by what he says, not bound by what Bush said, and certainly not bound by anything Clinton said. We have to figure this out for ourselves. This is a citizen's responsibility now. It's a matter of solidarity with the democratic forces in Iraq, and it's a matter of the possibility, the fighting chance, that a spring of democratization can be brought to the region, as well as that the non-proliferation success, which is one, whatever haphazard route we came to it by, Iraq is now certifiably disarmed, all weapons of mass destruction, can be extended. Colonel Gaddafi of Libya was induced to capitulate on this point and to place all his fissile and other suspicious material in our hands. They're all now under lock and key in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. I think that's where they ought to be, just like I think the dock is where Saddam Hussein ought to be. Mr. Gaddafi did not capitulate to Kofi Annan, or to Jacques Chirac, Saddam's pimp, or to Gerhard Schroeder, Saddam's bumboy.
Well,
he capitulated to Blair and to Bush. He said, I've had enough. We can't go on like this anymore. And by walking back that cat, ladies and gentlemen, finding where Libya got all this stuff, and it was always more than we thought, as it is with Iran, more than we'd suspected or alleged, as it is with North Korea, more, not less, than we suspected and alleged. They were able to identify its origin in the A.Q. Khan nukes our ass Walmart in Pakistan. And now A.Q. Khan is where he ought to be, which is under house arrest. This isn't perfect, but it is progress, and it is worth arguing about, and we have the responsibility for it. We're not spectators here, we're not onlookers, we're not consumers.
Christopher, and Scott might know more about this than I do. I remember, and I can't document what I read, but I remember reading a rather lengthy op-ed someplace, and maybe I'm hallucinating it, but the gist of it was that what happened with respect to Gaddafi yielding these weapons and storing them at Oak Ridge was the product of a very lengthy 10 or 12-year negotiation that also happened with that was going on during the whole of the Clinton administration, and which saw its culmination at that time about a year ago. Do I have this right?
No, you haven't hallucinated that at all. And it doesn't, I don't believe it contradicts what I say. I mean, I talked to the British ambassador in Tripoli, who's now in Iran, not long ago about this. He's free to talk about it. It was one of the chief negotiators. He said, look, there were three ways in which it happened. There was, for once, good intelligence. They knew so much about what Gaddafi was doing, so much about what he had, that when they went to him and said, look, what about this? He was appalled to discover that they'd got him cold. Then there's been a very long discussion about bringing Libya back into the tent after the Pan Am atrocity and the sanctions that were connected to that, and the renormalization of relations with most European countries. That's most contributory. And then he said, and then there's Iraq. He realized the game wasn't worth the candle, and he was impressed by the fact that there was a point beyond which the United States could no longer be bluffed or teased or bullied or just told to keep looking and we'll play hide and seeks. And okay, it's over. We give up. But he gave up to, that's why I mentioned it, to Bush and to Blair, not to Blix or Annan or Chirac or Schroeder. And the stuff is in Oak Ridge, which is exactly where it ought to be. And we should be proud that that's the case. And all those who were involved in bringing out about the disarmament of Libya so peacefully have a right, I think, to some praise.
And I would give
them...
them...
They never get it.
I, for one, will give them praise for getting rid of Libya's weapons of mass destruction. It represents a process that should have been applied to Iraq as well. And had it been applied to Iraq, 2,125 plus Americans would be home with their families alive. 15,000 Americans whose lives have been torn asunder would have their bodies intact, their mental facilities intact, and tens of thousands, if not more, Iraqis would be alive, albeit under a dictatorship. But I would have to say that I would, for one, prefer to be an Iraqi under Saddam than an Iraqi under a brutal American occupation. One that is...
Okay.
One that I must point out. One that I must point out.
Steady, steady. We'll get to you. We'll get to you. Relax.
Well, no, it was about time that we started to disagree, I think.
Well, and I will. When you say that James Baker's statements have no relevance to you, that the statements of the President of the United States have no relevance to you, then you are saying that the rule of law has no relevance to you. The rule of law is absolute. Yes, the United States Senate did in fact pass the Iraq Liberation Act in 1998, but Section 8 of that specifically prohibits the use of American force in removing Saddam Hussein from power. So don't make a linkage between that policy and what occurred in 2003. Ladies and gentlemen, what occurred in 2003, Section 8 most certainly does. It says that the United States has a policy of regime change, supporting an opposition, but it prohibits the use of American military power to achieve this objective. That is 180 degrees different from the policy that was undertaken by the Bush administration in 2003. I'm not here to defend Saddam Hussein or his regime.
Well, don't do it then.
I'm not. I'm here to defend the United States of America and our way of life. And I'm here to tell you right now that if you support this war, if you support this occupation, you support a process that represents the erosion of what it means to be an American. You represent a process that legitimizes illegal wiretaps in the name of national security. You represent a process that allows the President of the United States and his administration to deliberately falsify information